On a crisp autumn evening in Los Angeles, Clint Eastwood walked quietly down a less-traveled street. Dressed in a simple jacket and jeans, he was far from the flashing cameras and red carpets. At 94, Clint had embraced a quieter life, often seeking solace in unassuming places. That evening, he stopped at a small cafe for a cup of tea, enjoying the warmth of the drink in his hands as the world hurried by. As he stepped outside, a faint voice reached his ears. "Sir, can you give me $1?" Clint turned toward the sound. Sitting on the curb was a homeless man. His face was weathered, his clothes tattered, and his hands trembled as he held an empty coffee cup. His eyes, sunken and tired, held a mixture of hope and despair. "What's your name?" Clint asked, crouching slightly to meet the man's eyes. The man hesitated, surprised by the question. "David," he finally replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "You hungry, David?" Clint asked, his voice calm and steady. David nodded, his lips trembling as he lowered his gaze. "Come on," Clint said, extending his hand. "Let's get you something to eat." David hesitated but then took Clint's hand. Together, they walked to a small diner down the street. Heads turned as they entered, the sight of Clint Eastwood with a homeless man causing quiet murmurs among the patrons. Clint didn't pay attention. He chose a booth in the corner and waved over a waitress. "Two of the biggest meals you've got," he said with a faint smile. As they waited for their food, Clint turned to David. "Tell me your story." David hesitated at first, his hands fidgeting nervously. But there was something about Clint's presence, calm and unjudging, that made him feel safe enough to open up. "I used to be a carpenter," David began, his voice tinged with both pride and sorrow. "I built houses, beautiful ones. I had a wife, 2 kids, a good life." Clint nodded, his piercing blue eyes locked on David, listening intently. "But then, my wife got sick. Cancer. It took everything we had, our savings, our home. When she died, I didn't know how to handle it. I started drinking, stopped showing up for work. Before I knew it, I was on the streets." David's voice broke, and tears welled up in his eyes. "My kids, they stopped talking to me. I don't blame them. Who'd want a failure like me in their life?" By the time he finished, tears streamed freely down his face. Clint sat in silence for a moment, his face unreadable. Then he leaned back and said, "David, life can hit hard. Real hard. But the thing about life is, it's not over until it's over. You've still got fight left in you, I can see it." David shook his head, wiping at his eyes. "I wouldn't even know where to start." Clint excused himself briefly, stepping outside to make a phone call. When he returned, he slid a folded piece of paper and a crisp $100 bill across the table. "What's this?" David asked, his voice trembling. "That," Clint said, pointing to the paper, "is the number of a friend of mine. He runs a shelter that offers more than a bed. They'll help you get back on your feet, job training, counseling, whatever you need. I already called him. He's expecting you." David stared at the paper, his hands shaking. "And the money?" Clint continued, "That's for now. To keep you going until you get there. But there's one condition." David's voice cracked. "What's that?" "You've got to promise me you'll call. You've got a second chance waiting for you, but only if you take it." David clutched the paper and the money, tears streaming down his face. "I will," he said, his voice barely audible. "I promise." Clint smiled faintly, his expression softening. "Good. You've got more life to live, David. Don't let this be the end of your story." The two men parted ways that evening, but the encounter stayed with David. The next day, he called the number Clint had given him and checked into the shelter. Over the following months, with the shelter's help, David rebuilt his life. He found work as a carpenter again and even began mending his relationship with his children. Word of Clint's gesture spread, inspiring countless people. When asked about it in an interview, Clint simply said, "Sometimes, people just need a little hope. It doesn't take much to change a life, you just have to care." The story became a testament to the power of compassion and the incredible difference a single act of kindness can make.